Welcome to The Explainer. This week we are diving deep into The Economist to really get a handle on a world where, honestly, the old rules just seem to be breaking down, everywhere from Washington, D.C. to the entire global economy.
So check out this week's cover from The Economist. It's a real statement, anything goes America. And it perfectly sets the stage for this theme that just keeps popping up throughout the issue. This feeling that the norms we all counted on are unraveling. And not just in politics, but in global trade too.
So this brings us to the central question the magazine is really digging into. What actually happens when the rules, the political, the economic, the social ones we've all kind of taken for granted, what happens when they just start to fall apart? Okay, so our first story really gets into this whole idea of an anything goes America, and it shines a light on a pretty worrying shift in the country's political landscape. The lead article makes a pretty powerful claim that the unwritten rules, the ones that were supposed to stop politicians from just enriching themselves, are being systematically torn down. What they're talking about is basically a throwback, a return to a system where public office is seen as a fast track to getting rich. And it's got these eerie echoes of America's Gilded Age back in the late 19th century, a time when, industrial tycoons had this massive, unchecked political power. The magazine comes up with this really powerful, kind of chilling metaphor for this new environment. They're calling it the Black Friday presidency, where it feels like everything and maybe everyone has a price tag. And, this kind of unpredictability, it creates a total gold rush for lobbyists and foreign powers. Suddenly, there's this huge incentive to spend big, not on debating policy, but just on winning personal favor. Now, this whole theme of shifting rules, it's not just an American story, not by a long shot. We're seeing its impact right in the heart of global trade, especially when you look at Europe's relationship with China. So Europe is staring down what The Economist calls a new China shock. See, for years, China was a massive customer, but now it's a super formidable competitor, especially in high-end, advanced manufacturing. And when you look at the numbers, they tell a really stark story, particularly for a powerhouse like Germany. I mean, with a huge chunk of its GDP tied directly to exports to China, the economic stakes are just immense. So this is the core problem for Europe. How do you protect your own industries from these state-backed Chinese giants without losing access to one of your biggest markets? It is a classic catch-22 situation.
The analysis pretty much suggests that figuring out this middle path, one that's realistic about the threat, but doesn't get into a self-destructive trade war, is one of the most urgent challenges European leaders have on their plate right now.
All right, so all this instability we're talking about, it isn't just some abstract idea. It is directly hitting family finances all across the developed world, and you can really see it when you look at housing and wages. The American housing market, well, it's pretty much in a deep freeze. After all those years of crazy rising prices, the whole market has just seized up. It's locking current owners in and pricing potential buyers right out. And at the heart of this whole housing freeze is one single number, 6.8%. With mortgage rates more than doubling in just a couple of years, the dream of owning a home has become, well, for millions, an impossible dream. So shifting from housing over to wages, The Economist takes a really critical look at this big push for higher and higher minimum wages. They argue that, while it's well-intentioned, it might not actually be the best tool for the job. I mean, if you look at countries like Poland and Britain, the minimum wage is already getting close to half the median wage. And that's a threshold that starts to make economists pretty nervous about jobs potentially being lost. So the big takeaway here isn't that we shouldn't help low-wage workers. Of course we should. The argument is really about how we do it. The magazine suggests that other tools, like in-work tax credits that top up earnings directly, might boost incomes a lot more effectively without putting jobs on the line. And finally, let's zoom all the way out and see how these themes, all this economic pressure and these fraying rules, are playing out across the entire geopolitical landscape. I mean, you look around and the world just feels like it's on a knife's edge. Over in Europe, you've got a corruption scandal in Ukraine that's threatening Western unity, and at the same time, in Asia, Japan is starting to shed its post-war pacifism for a much more muscular defense policy. And adding to all this global instability, the magazine reports that jihadism is making a comeback in Africa's Sahel region, which just highlights that we're living in a world that's dealing with multiple, serious crises all at once. It is so crucial to see how all these different events connect. The political turmoil in the U.S., the trade friction with China, all these regional conflicts, they're all symptoms of a world that is going through a massive, fundamental transformation.
So, if you take just one thing away from this week's issue, it should be this. We are in an era of profound change. The assumptions we've held for a long, long time, the ones that have shaped our world, they're all being challenged and completely rewritten. And so, The Economist leaves us with this final, incredibly powerful question. If the old order is actually breaking down, what, if anything, is going to rise up to replace it? That is the unsettling question that's hanging over all of us.